Okay. Good morning, loved ones. Today I'm talking about patience. I'm teaching from James 5:7-12 in the English Standard Version. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the latter rains. You also be patient, period. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Time magazine published an article by Nancy Gibbs about how America is running out of time. We here in Canada are the same. The article was about the increasing value of time, but it's not just in the world out there, it's also in our own lives. This is what she said. There was once a time when time was money. Both could be wasted or well spent. But in the end, gold was always the higher cost. As with almost any commodity, however, scarcity drives and determines value. And these days, it is the time of the time famine. Time that once seemed free and elastic has grown tight and elusive. And so our measure of it and its worth has dramatically changed. In Florida, a man billed his doctor for keeping him waiting for an hour. In California, a woman hires somebody to shop for her out of a catalog. People pay other people to pick up their dry cleaning. They pay people to cater dinner to their house for 4 people. And what we've learned is that just about everything that we used to do, we can now pay somebody else to do. And why do we do this? To save time. With time becoming so precious, is it any wonder that waiting has become the most hated and frustrating experience in life? We wait in bank lines. We wait in supermarket lines. We wait in traffic jams. And while we wait, we fret, because we're wasting time. I heard a funny story about waiting. The most frustrating experience is waiting when you go out to eat. You wait to be seated, and then you wait for the menu, and then you wait for the person to come and take your order, and then you wait for your food. After you eat, you wait for the dessert menu. After you order, you wait for the dessert. And when you're done, you wait for the bill. After you get your bill, you wait for the person to come back and take your money, or you wait in line at the cash register. And somebody had the audacity to say that the person who presides over all of this is the waiter. They're not the waiter, we are. And it's frustrating, isn't it? I read about a great New England preacher, Phillips Brooks. He is known for his calmness and his poise, but his close friends knew another side of the preacher. He had bouts of frustration and irritability. One day, his friends saw him pacing the floor like a caged lion, and he asked, "What's wrong, Dr. Brooks?" And Brooks said, "The trouble is, I'm in a hurry, and God isn't." How many times have we felt and said the same thing. So today's message is about patience. A lot of people don't like talking about patience because they don't have any. For now, don't assign patience the meaning you would normally give it. Have patience, no pun intended, till the end of this message, before you assign the value that you normally would and that you've been conditioned in life to do. Patience in the Bible is a very high commodity, and it's very highly valued. Paul mentions patience in his first letter to the Corinthians when he characterizes what love is. He includes it in the 9 traits of a spirit-filled life in the letter to the Galatians. To the Ephesians, when he explains what a life worthy of God is. In Colossians, he includes it in what Christians should clothe themselves in. He said, we should clothe ourselves with long-suffering and with patience. Patience was one of Paul's greatest characteristic virtues. Someone said, if you have patience, you can carry water in a sieve if you wait till it freezes. And boy, do we need patience in this world today. My mom used to say, when she watched me build model trucks and cars, that I had the patience of Job, from painting each little tiny piece and then gluing it together. Boy, was she ever wrong. But I have learned patience over time. Not enough, but God is still working on me. James tells us that we need patience when we face difficulties. He says, be patient, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it to receive the early and latter rains. You also be patient, establishing your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Their people were suffering persecution. In James 5, he talks about the wicked wealthy and how they were treating their brothers. James is reminding the readers that no matter what evil is done to them, they are not to retaliate against them or against God. The word patience in the Greek is pronounced makiaphuma. It stresses non-retaliation, holding your spirit in check, self-restraint in the face of provocation. It's the opposite of anger, and it's associated with mercy. Patience, in the first part of this text, it talks about the ability to suffer wrongfully without feeling the necessity to respond in kind or to get even. A perfect example of this is Jesus Christ. He was verbally abused, he was spat on, he was falsely accused, he was beaten and nailed to the cross. He suffered much, but he did not retaliate. In 1 Peter 1:21, he says, for this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in turn. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. What James is saying here is that until Christ comes and rights all of the wrongs, we as believers are to leave vengeance in the hands of God. This is tough on us as believers to handle. James and Jude were farmers, so a lot of the analogies come from a farming background, hence the early and the latter rains. In James' day, there wasn't modern irrigation, so the farmers had to wait for the early rains to plow and plant, and they had to wait for the latter rains to have the grain ripen. What James is saying is, that the believers who are facing hostility must be willing to wait for vindication. The patience that we exhibit while waiting for the Lord's return is not passive. It's not just taking it. And that is where patience gets a bad rap. Patience is endurance. Patience is hanging in there when things get tough, or when you want to exact revenge or get even. In verse 8 he says, establish your hearts, make firm your hearts. The Williams Paraphrase Bible puts it like this: you must put iron in your hearts. The New English translation says, you must be stout-hearted. James is telling the readers to take this situation in hand. It is their duty to develop courage and firmness in spite of the fact that they are being attacked and being treated unfairly. Now, this goes against everything as we humans are inclined to think, and also what we feel. When somebody mistreats you, you want to get them back. We need patience when we face difficulties. We also need patience when we face disappointment. Let's look at verse 9. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. This verse almost seems out of place until we stop and ask ourselves this question. What we usually do when somebody wrongs us is we complain to anybody who will listen. We call our friends and tell them about the rotten thing that has just happened to us. Sometimes we lash out at one another in different situations than we normally would find ourselves. What James is saying is, do not blame the troubles on each other. Do not grumble against one another, because if you do, you fall under the judgment. The judge is at the door. In the Paraphrase Bible, it says, don't make complaints against each other because you might be at fault and the judge is at the door. What James is saying is how we act towards one another. We are to be Christ-like and to exhibit the same long-suffering towards one another. Before you accuse someone of being unsympathetic to your pain, you might find out quickly that you're wrong. Remember, the sinners with Christ or without Christ is only one heartbeat away from the judge. When you die and you enter the presence of God, you will be facing the judge, and you'll be judged for every idle word that you spoke. And I don't know about you, but that scares me. Lots of times, my words have not been what they should have been. We need patience when we face disapproval. James says in verse 10, my brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. James is telling us that there have been many before us who have walked the path of disapproval and suffering. Just look at the prophets in the Old Testament. James' point is this: the prophets suffered not because they did anything wrong, but because they were doing what was right. They spoke in the name of the Lord, and they were chastised for it. That's because the people didn't want to listen. Not that they couldn't listen, they didn't want to listen. James knew what he was talking about, according to secular historians. James himself met with a violent end because he would not denounce the messiahship of Jesus. He was thrown down from the pinnacle of the temple by the order of Annas, the high priest. All the apostles suffered unjustly, but they learned not to retaliate. They learned endurance. Next, we need patience when we face disaster. James 11 says, "You have heard of the patience of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful." And just as a side note here, James is the only New Testament writer who mentions the name of Job. You know the story of Job, how one minute he was on top and the next he was absolutely devastated. He faced disaster with patience, but Job did not just take it. He was not perfect. He complained, but Job had a strong endurance. Job is not remembered for his mistakes or for his complaining, but for his patience. Here's what Dr. Criswell wrote about Job. Satan had cast Job upon a dung heap, but he made the dung heap a throne in the presence of the great God. Satan afflicted him with sores and boils, but Job made them signets of honor. They were citations and medals all over him. And Job made Satan eat his words. And we can do that today. We can make Satan eat his words because he's up there complaining about all of us as well. He made Satan confess he was a liar, and God was in it all. He gave Job back double of everything, including his grace and love. For grace and love do not come in any other way but through trial and suffering. Now that doesn't mean in order for God's love to be given to us and his grace that we have to suffer. But during the times of great suffering and great pain, that's when God's love and grace is even greater. I want to be clear. This does not mean that you have to suffer to feel the love and the grace of God. It's just that it's stronger when we are in those situations. And lastly, we need patience when we feel dishonesty, or when we face dishonesty. In verse 12, James says, "But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth, or with any oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, lest you fall into judgment." I want to be clear here as well. This does not mean taking an oath in court. Some people think that there's no connective in verse 12 of what we were just talking about, but there is. The connective is right at the beginning of the verse. It says, "But above all." Above all what? Above all that I've just been telling you. James echoes what Jesus said in the book of Matthew. This is what James said. "Again, you have heard it said of those of old, who shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is God's footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great God, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." Those are the words of Jesus. In the context of this lesson, James is teaching here, oath-taking was very much abused in James's day. It was used in clever schemes by rabbis to control their people. What James is saying is about indiscriminate oath-taking. Like saying, "God, strike me down if I am lying." Jesus and James are forbidding the use of meaningless words. You need to be very wary of people who are always trying to convince you that he or she is telling the truth. Speak the truth. Have you ever heard someone say, "I didn't do it, I swear to God"? That is a type of thing that James is talking about here. Swearing an oath like that all the time might just mean that you have developed a reputation for not always telling the truth. If someone has been a liar, they need to have patience to allow people time to see that they have changed and that now their yes is yes and their no is no. Speak the truth. Now, I want to be clear on this. Speaking the truth does not give you free rein to brutalize people. With what we believe is the truth, you need to put Christ's filter over your mouth before you say anything stupid. Ask yourself, how would Jesus say this to me if he were talking to me? You can always tell the truth, but do it without destroying the person that you're telling the truth to. We need patience. A better word for patience is endurance. But remember, patience is not passive. Patience is strong, a strong resilience in your spirit under pressure. We need to stand strong and face things that we cannot change. In the farming community, if a farmer has a problem, other farmers come together and help. Don't attack one another. Come together, stand strong, and always stay in prayer to the Lord from where your help comes. Thank you.